It's Barbara Groark of Cape May Radio, and today we are putting our WCFA spotlight on Sylvia Baer. She is the first poet laureate of Cape May, New Jersey, and she's the author of a book coming out in August 2022, and it's called Learning Life, a Memoir. And she has poems out there for adults and kids. She has academic articles. She has a play. She's a director of an art studio and a fellow at Yale University. Sylvia, when do you have time to sleep?
No, I don't sleep very well these days. But
Your life story that I read on your website, by the way, it's sylviabaer.com.
Yep.
Baer, by the way. And why a memoir now?
Yeah, it's an odd thing, isn't it? I have been writing my whole life. I used to, ever since I was a kid, I had little notebooks that I would keep, and I would write down little, as from the time I can remember, I had just these little notebooks. And I just find life and people, especially, incredibly interesting. And I loved listening to stories. I loved listening to stories of my grandmother and her friends and my mother, and I would just write everything down. And they kind of accumulated, and I've been writing pieces of memoir much of my life. But I think something happened to me this past, I guess the pandemic happened to all of us, right?
Right.
And I began really thinking about these threads that run through all of our lives. And as I would tell other people some of these stories, and especially my students, they would always encourage me to write them down and share them with others. And I started doing that on social media and found that in the stories that I tell, which are very unique to my life, of course, they're my memoirs, other people seem to find points of connection. And the more of those I wrote, the more points of connection seemed to happen. And I think at right now, as really has been the case for a very, very long time, people seem so divided in so many ways. And I think we have a tendency as humans to become very tribal, to become very, very connected to whatever it is that we have and we want and we see ourselves as. And some of that, of course, is necessary for a lot of survival. But I think it's important to remember our common humanity and to find commonalities because we do share this world. And I was delighted that my little stories seem to have that connection for people. And so I just kept writing them. And I've been lucky enough to have all of the photographs and again, my notebooks. I keep everything, which is a bit of a problem, I gotta say.
And you have had them all these years, so
yes, it's a little bit of a problem. I have a very understanding husband who kind of deals with stuff.
that helps. Yes, and it's not just. Well, I know you mentioned Emily Dickinson as a favorite on your website, and
Yeah.
I see that a little bit, but there's also like a mind-boggling set of events. You go back a couple of generations,
Yeah.
and your family is from Europe, and they moved away to go away from the Nazis. So
Yes.
I kept thinking of Madeleine Albright's memoirs, and also Czeslaw Milosz.
Yes.
Uh, those are two people that are, big in the culture that their families ran from the Nazis.
Mm.
And in Milosz's case, that he turned around and looked over a hill, and here come the communists. So, and they're totalitarian,
Yes.
one totalitarian regime to another. It's interesting that your family ended up in Uruguay.
Yes, I mean, it's
Wow.
a very interesting, well, interesting to me and apparently interesting to others. And so many others have very common stories with, of course, their own
Mm-hmm.
subset of details. But my my grandmother was one of 13 kids, and only three of them survived the Holocaust. And it was only because they were able to get out And this is before the Holocaust actually happened. And my grandmother had to deal with pogroms in Poland, in the eastern part of Poland. Um, and very difficult. My mother also, she was very young when they left. And so the stories, often people of my grandmother's generation and my mother's generation didn't want to talk about it. They really didn't want to talk about it. And some of my grandmother's friends didn't want to talk about it. My grandmother was, yeah, sure, ask me questions. I'm fine. It's in the past. So I do have those stories, but they're incredible stories. And the older I get, and the more I understand about what my life has been, the more I appreciate the sacrifices and really the horror that they had to go through to get to where I am now. And I need to celebrate that. I need to appreciate it, of course, but I
Yeah,
also need
wonderful.
to celebrate it.
Yeah. And that's part of the defense is to celebrate anyhow. Mother
Uh,
Teresa said something about that. Celebrate anyhow, even though you've had all these hardships.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
I mean, I celebrate that I'm here, and
Yeah.
my grandmother would say that to me about you're here. I said, how did
Mhm.
you do that? And she said, we just did it, and now you're here. And
You don't
tell the
analyze ahead
stories.
of time, right?
Right. Tell the stories.
Mhm. Let's see. Shall we do a reading from the book?
I have the prologue, if you
Sure.
like that. It's a few pages long.
Okay.
Can you tolerate that?
Yes, we can.
And I'm really looking forward to this coming out. This is going to be, by the way, volume 1 of 3. It just takes us part way through up to when I begin teaching. I have gone through more than 50 years of teaching now. So volume 1 will take me right up to the beginning of teaching. This is from the prologue, and it's called Who Will Tell Our Stories? When I walked in, she was on the sofa crying. There's no hope for any of us, my mother spurted out between sobs. Just then, my father came into the room with a glass of water and 2 aspirin. Here's Sarah, take these, it'll help. She looked up at him gratefully and swallowed the pills. Mom, what happened? I asked. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis has just died. Died, she answered as she set the glass down and began leaving the room. And I'm going to lie down for a bit. It was May 19th, 1994. I was 44 years old, and my father and I were left to sort out the pieces of my mother's grief. I don't really understand it, Daddy, I began. I mean, she hasn't met the woman. She only knows her through stories in the paper and magazines and TV. Why is she so emotional? Equally baffled, my father posed some possibilities. Well, they're close to the same age, and maybe she's afraid that if someone with so much power and money and connections can die, then, well, here he trailed off, afraid to finish the sentence, but then looked me squarely in the face and did. We can all die. We will all die. It's a hard reality at our age and a sad but inevitable truth. He continued, Jackie was beautiful and elegant, but your mother was so much more. When I first met her, I thought she was the most glamorous woman I had ever known. She still is, he sighed. I never thought about their first meeting. Fresh out of a New York University master's program in economics, my American father had gone to Montevideo, Uruguay to start a branch of the Schick Razor Company. He was 25 years old. He spoke little Spanish and knew right away he needed help with not only the language, but the customs. When she walked into my office, I found it hard to say anything. Her raven black hair fell in waves on her shoulders, and when she reached out her white gloved hand to take mine, I knew I was a goner. He laughed, remembering the details. She didn't seem like she had much experience as a secretary, and really, after she started working, she was abysmal at it. Tried firing her twice, but she wouldn't stay away, and neither could I. When we formally became a couple, I was finally able to meet her 3-year-old daughter. You, he smiled, and I loved you from the first moment as well. He hugged me and continued, You know, she had been in medical school, but then stopped. She married Harry, and you were born, and then Harry was horrible to both of you. When he disappeared, everyone was relieved. And then we met, fell in love, got married, and moved here to the US. It seemed so simple when he told it, but I knew there was more. Now she came back into the living room, her eyes red and puffy, tissue clutched in her hand, and sat down next to me. My father took this as a cue to leave us alone and wandered off into the kitchen. I want to explain, she began, what troubles me so much. Jackie Kennedy Onassis was a really complicated woman. She had a hard life. I jumped in. Sure, her husband was president and then he was assassinated in the car right next to her. Now my mother continued. Well, of course there was that terrible trauma. But she was full of so many tragedies. She had miscarriages and her husband had so many affairs. He was terrible to her. She only married him because everyone said that since she was already in her 20s, she was getting very old and needed to find a husband soon. She had gone to college and had earned a job at a magazine, but was told she really should just get married. I understand this. It was like that in those days. Now she sipped the water she'd left behind, and I noticed a hint of newly applied lipstick on the rim. Even in her sadness, my mother wanted to look put together, as she called it. So she married JFK, helped him become president, had 2 children, and when he died, she was alone. Alone. All that wealth and popularity and beauty, and still alone. But then she married one of the richest men in the world, right? I said. She continued. Who knows why she did that? Maybe she loved him. Maybe she saw no choice. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe it was security. But that too wasn't happy. Now she looked at the large clock on the wall and fell silent. We could hear it tick, tick, tick the seconds away. She looked at me again. When he died, she came back to the US. She began working with the arts and with publishing. You know, the press was not kind to her, but she kept going, until today. Now my mother's head folded down into her hands. Mom, I said as I put my arm around her shoulder, is it upsetting to you that we can all die? I'm trying to understand. No, it's not really that, she said as her tear-filled eyes searched mine. It's her story. Who tells her story now? How will we know about her life, her struggles, her energies? Maybe my mother herself had a sense that her arteries were starting their hardening, her heart beating out a new staccato rhythm, not allowing enough oxygen for her brain to connect the wandering memories. Sylvia, she continued, I'm afraid that all our stories will be lost. What will happen to all of the life we led? Where will it go? I gently put my hand on her quivering, rounded back and said, tell me about the time you and Father got the car stuck in the thick mud on your way to Brazil, making us both chuckle at the memory of an old family tale. Then we got out photo albums and talked over tea. My father grilled some steaks and we kept talking over dinner. And into the chill of the May night, we laughed. 5 years later, my father died of cancer. 5 years after that, my mother died of heart conditions. And today I'm here right now telling you their stories, keeping them alive.
Thank you.
That was a prologue. So
Yeah, and there was another one about Lieberson that I liked. I won't ask you to read that now. Well, where can we get your book when it comes out in August?
it's going to be on all the, the Amazon and
Okay.
Barnes Noble and all those sites.
Will you be reading around the neighborhood?
I will indeed. I will. I have lots of gigs.
Okay.
Signings apparently will be happening around the hood here.
Okay. So bookstores,
Hmm.
Those kind of places. Okay, so we'll just look for notices where we look for notices.
Yeah.
Well, we can see you around town here in Cape May and vicinity. Speaking of Cape May, you are the first poet laureate of Cape May.
A poet laureate, we're feeling our way through this particular idea. It was an interesting idea that the city council took, I think, from our national poet laureate. And there are poet laureates in various places around the country, around states. Various states have them,
Right?
but there aren't very many of them. And so, what one does as a poet laureate is really tailored to the place.
Okay.
What I see myself as doing, Cape May, is being more of a poet ambassador or
Mhm.
ambassador words. And so I was asked a few times to write some original poems for our town, which is a quite original town in and of
Yeah.
itself.
Hmm.
Our whole area is here, and I do that. I also like to use famous poets as well because sometimes I have words that work for us, but sometimes there are better words there that are put
Okay.
together in better ways than I can.
That's
And
right.
so I would like to celebrate them also, those words. But I did write a specific poem, Cape May. Well, I had a very hard time. I have to tell you, I had a really hard time writing this poem because how does one encapsulate all of Cape May in one poem, right? And it's really not possible. So I thought I would just do a more global idea of a sense of who we are as a community, as a group, as a place, because so many visitors are part of our world here as well, as those who are short term and very long term residents of where we are, including the critters that are wonderful residents of
That's right.
our location here.
That's right.
We have some amazing critters that also stop to visit and some that live here, right?
That's right.
So I called it our Cape May. We breathe the scent of water. The air is full of its possibilities. So it has been for eons, so it will be for eons more. Millions of feet have walked our land where trees have complicated roots, tangles of nourishment grown deep underground, holding the earth we stand on. The lapping of ocean waves defines our days, reflects the sky's mood also. The sun's risings, its settings, the stars blankets them all gently in its time. In this rhythm, this place on a bit of land jutting out to the ocean, we live life, a precarious existence, but sturdy, supported by the welcoming earth. And we recognize the absolute wonder that has brought us to here and to now, and to the delight as we look out to the sea, to the sky, to the nature that surrounds us, to the buildings that house our worship, merriment, helpers, culture, art, learning, healing, nourishment, transactions, and rest, the homes and cottages where we build lives, and to each other's faces and destinies. We know that we are tied together by bonds of history, purpose, appreciation, fellowship, a celebration of the human family. This place that firmly holds our lives, our hopes, also holds the promise that our time here will create a gentle, ever widening circle of community to take us safely and humbly into the future, where others will gladly breathe the scent of water, the air full of its possibilities, as it has been for eons, as it will be for eons more.
Thank you, Sylvia. Tell us
Yes.
about the poetry.
Well, it's a goofy thing I am doing. Uh, I've been doing it now for about 5 years, and
Really?
it's just a tree. It's a miniature weeping cherry tree in my front yard,
Mhm.
and it has sort of an umbrella shape, right? I've always had this idea of, I play with words a lot. Go figure, I'm a poet, right? So it's what we do, right?
Right?
And so I thought, wouldn't it be kind of cool? I always thought to have a tree that's poet dash tree, like poetry.
Yeah, yeah.
So I thought, oh, that'd be kind of a fun thing. And I played with the idea for a while. But then I guess it was about 5 years ago, and I was feeling very frustrated by the world. Unusually so. I don't generally get that frustrated and upset by things in a sense that I felt stuck. Usually I have some way out of something,
Mm.
but I really felt stuck. And I wanted to find something I could do to sort of this great divide that we keep having,
Mhm.
somehow build some sort of bridges. And I mean, what to do? I'm an English professor, I'm a poet, I'm a writer. I'm not a politician. I don't want to be. I'm good with that. And I really had no way of figuring out how I could build those bridges, what I could do. And I don't know what came over me, but I looked at this tree one day and I thought, I'm going to hang poems on this tree. And
Okay.
I'm just going to have a sign that tells people if they want to take a poem. And I started doing it. My husband, bless his heart, goes along with all of my quirky ideas. And he made some very rustic signs. He's a professor as well. So when I say rustic, I mean really rustic. Okay. So he made these signs for me. We put them out in front of the tree. And it just says, if you like a poem, take it and enjoy it. So I printed poems out in different colored paper, and you can see some of those back there. I attached them to my closet doors so I can keep track of which ones I have out there. And I
Oh,
have about 60 poems up on the tree that I hang with just little teeny tiny clothespins and string. I have the yellow ones. You can see the yellow ones behind me there. Those are for kids, and the different colored ones are for the adults. When I first did this, my husband didn't want me to be disappointed. He didn't want nobody, he didn't want people to not show up. He just didn't want me to be disappointed. And I said, really, it's fun just doing it.
so
I
he was
did.
afraid it was going to be a flop.
Yeah, he was afraid for me because he didn't want me to be sad, you know? So, as it turns out, from the first day, and we have it 2 months through July and August every year. And from the first day, I've had to replenish the tree. People come by the tree and take poems. And it just makes my heart so happy to look out my window and see groups of people out there. Sometimes they're connected and related folks, and sometimes they're just separate people just wandering by and reading poems.
So you keep the same group of poems.
No,
Wow, that's a job.
it, it's a real job, and I keep printing them out. And
Hmm.
uh, I print out the poems, and I
You cover them in like a
no,
plastic. Oh,
no,
okay. They're
because
just
they
on
take
paper.
them. Yeah, they because
Rain or
people
shine.
rain or well, not really. If it's raining, they get really soggy. It's not a very pretty sight. So when it rains, we take them down. We have a little sign that says "rain delay," and um, then we put them back up the next. As soon as it stops, we encourage people to take these poems. We don't cover them in plastic or anything. We just take the poems. They're on regular size 8.5 by 11 paper. And yes, I keep some of them are repeats, but in general, I try to every
Yeah.
couple of weeks have brand new poems up there for people.
Do you think it's safe to give out your address so people can stop by? I know,
Sure.
I know you're not a federal judge, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm. Nobody cares about me, really. Seriously.
Just the street came in.
Sure, it's 1020 Michigan Avenue. I mean, you can see it. Anyone goes by, they know
Okay.
that's my house. With the poems dangling on the tree, and the poetry is not my poetry. It's poems by famous poets,
Okay.
contemporary, old dead people, translated poems from all over the world, and a whole variety. And again, because I've been teaching for literature for over 50 years now, so I
Yeah.
really do have a good bunch of material to work with. So I
Great.
think it makes it easier for me to do that.
Wow, that's really fun.
Yeah,
So, and how many times a day did you have to replenish?
about twice a day. We and
Okay.
we have 60 poems up at any given time,
Okay.
and about twice a day. So that's a lot of poems that we
Yeah.
go through, and it just makes me very happy to think of so many people out there. And sometimes I have to go outside to get in my car or something, and people will be there, and folks stop me and talk to me. And I've had some wonderful interactions and lovely stories by the tree. It's really been a great joy for me to do this.
Well, we'll have to do a drive-by Michigan Avenue in
Yes,
Cape May. Sylvia, this has been great.
it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.